Thank you for coming back so promptly, everyone. Thanks for coming back at all, quite frankly. Generous, but I'll take it. Now, 80% of your time will be focused on drawdown within just 8 years from now. I'll say that again, time to reflect. 80% of your time will be focused on drawdown-related activities within 8 years from today. Now, 8 years is not a long time. Rewind 8 years, and we've got the financial crisis, 2008. Still very clear in your memories, I would suggest. Now, where does that stat come from? It comes from a publication called Retirement Planner, one of the publications from Incisive Media, a respected source. And yet, at the end of 2015, according to research from the Platform, the number was about 5 to 6% in terms of how much of your time is dedicated to drawdown. Now, I appreciate, these are averages. It's not going to be specific to each and every one of you, but there is a truism there. And that is that the growth in terms of both resource of your time and money flowing into the retirement income space could be enormous. And that brings us on to, there's one word in the subtitle here about sustainability. And I think it's important to think about sustainability in terms of processing that volume of transaction from your business point of view, and indeed the sustainability of income for the end clients. Will I run out of money? That's kind of the key question, right? So in terms of what I'm going to go through this afternoon, learning objectives, that's code for agenda nowadays, of course. We're going to touch on the current pension landscape, thinking about what are the key considerations that you need to think about for drawdown. Then we're going to look at what's common practice around the country in terms of generating that retirement income, and what are the key risks associated with that common practice. And finally, and I hope a little bit more interesting, if you're still with me by then, the practical application of a way of generating retirement income. And there'll be a couple of case studies at the end. So, using the word radical, I think, is absolutely fair in terms of the changes that we are living through and have lived through with regards to pensions. A lot of stuff on the slide at the minute. I'm going to focus on one word and possibly annoy most of the people in this room straight away by talking about guidance, pension-wise, money advice service. The stuff that you're funding, paying towards a levy to potentially take business away from you. Not ideal, granted, but if you haven't already done so, exploit the fact that there is a directory for advisors offering drawdown. It's a free service for advertising, free advertising for you. Get your services listed on the Money Advice Service directory for some potential referrals. Make that work to your benefit. That's all I'm going to say about the backdrop, because we've heard massive amount from the technical experts at James Hay, and Ian following me is going to, I'm sure, build on that technical know-how. In the main, though, this changing landscape is fantastic for your businesses. But things have to be dealt with differently in the construct of growth versus decumulation, deaccumulation, retirement withdrawals, retirement income, whatever you want to call it. You have to think differently. So by way of a very simple illustration, in a growth environment where you're not taking withdrawals, volatility can be your friend. And what are clients most interested in? The end destination, making the maximum amount of money at a reasonable amount of risk. And yet, conversely, on the way down, decumulation or withdrawals, volatility, of course, can be the arch enemy. Selling units at depressed prices to generate the very same amount of income can decimate a portfolio. So you have to think differently. And just to build on that idea, if you think about the FTSE 100, think about what the FTSE's done over the last 10 calendar years. We have seen wonderful growth, 100% growth over the last 10 years. And that's including the financial crisis. all the Armageddon that ensued and asset classes universally collapsing. But what was the reaction from central bankers? Ultra loose policy, injecting $15 trillion and growing into the financial markets, elevating asset prices, distorting the backdrop arguably, but growth has been wonderful. But if you're taking withdrawal during that time frame, look at what happened in the calendar years. The maximum loss, peak to trough, drawdown, we love jargon, forget pensions drawdown, this is investment drawdown, peak to trough loss. Every year, 10 out of 10 years has been a loss of over 10%. Now bring that back to an environment where your client may or may not be taking withdrawals, and this could be an absolute nightmare. And I suspect you've probably had clients who've experienced exactly that problem. In fact, ironically, last year, somewhat of a perfect storm. Pension freedom's introduced. Think about August, September onwards, China slowdown, asset class meltdown, a very testing start to flexi access drawdown. So what do you need to think about? What are some of the key components or factors that need to be considered when building a retirement income proposition or thinking about drawdown? Well, first and foremost, the pot size. How much is the total wealth? Clearly, you need to think about that. What is their income requirement? How much do they want to pass on in terms of legacy? They're probably the three starting points. Then you need to think about risk. Not just the attitude to risk, which is arguably all important on the way up, but I would say, and the FCA have said it, and plenty of other commentators have said it, more importantly is the capacity for loss. Why so? Well, because in an environment when you're in drawdown, typically people aren't going to be adding to their wealth. They're not working typically, although I appreciate it could be phased. So the capacity for loss has to be front and foremost. Then you need to think about a number of what-if scenarios. You need to stress test your proposition. So what if the client needs to increase the income? Pretty likely, I would suggest. What if they need an enormous withdrawal at a given moment in time? Funding a daughter's wedding, I don't know, fitting a new kitchen, new car, whatever it may be. What if investment growth is lower than expected? I'm going to pause and reflect on that for one moment, if I will. Because with equity markets in the developed world, at least, at record highs, and the yields available from fixed income at record lows, investment growth could be materially lower moving forwards. Now that is a question of managing expectations with your clients. In fact, I've chatted to a few people today about exactly that. Inflation could be higher, people might live longer, and what if you have a 2008 Mark II? What if, what if, what if? It's not an easy space. Typically, and this was reaffirmed in the platform research and anecdotally talking to advisors around the country, one common process for generating income is selling units. And isn't it a bit perverse, a bit weird in that, what do we do? For growth, we use income and reinvest, compounding effect, tick. And for income, we sell growth. It's kind of reverse engineering. But if you are selling units for income, there are three sort of key things you need to think about: longevity, inflation, and pound cost ravaging. And all of these three factors point towards what is or is not a safe withdrawal rate. Now, there's been a vast amount of research about exactly this subject, safe withdrawal rates. There's a professor called William P. Bengen, academic from the US, who produced a paper on exactly this subject, and he came out with, you've probably heard of it, the 4% magic rule. So that was based on 50% US equities, 50% US bonds, and what they deemed a safe withdrawal rate based on the starting pot, and then inflation adjusted was 4%. That's the starting point. Fine. Now we tried to add some colour to that 4% magic rule by looking at some research from another professor, a chap called Wade Pfau. And I want to introduce you to the risk of ruin rainbow. And this is all about, when will I run out of money? And again, I bring you back to that. I suspect that's one of the key headaches that your end clients are wrestling with. Now, this is based on a portfolio which could be 60% equities, 40% bonds. On the x-axis, we've got the length of retirement, and isn't that a bit weird? Good luck, but not impossible. Anyway, x-axis retirement. On the y-axis, we've got the withdrawal rate in percentage terms. Now, the coloured lines are denoting the probability of failure, i.e. the probability of running out of money. Now, to make sense of this, I'm going to give you a little illustration. Let's take an example of a client who has a 20-year retirement period, projected, and he or she, you've worked out that they want a 4.5% withdrawal rate. They won't talk percentages, granted, but that's the number that you've arrived at. 20-year retirement period, 4.5% withdrawals gets you to a 5% chance of running out of money. Fair enough, I would suspect. Not for everyone, but I suspect that's fair enough. If that's too high, then tone down the withdrawals. However, if you up the withdrawals from 4.5 to 7, which in percentage terms, granted, sounds like quite a lot. In monetary terms, it may not be. But if you dial up the withdrawal rate from 4.5 to 7, and you still have a 20-year retirement period, the probability of failure leaps up to 70%. Now, I'd lay money on the fact that not a single one of your clients will be comfortable accepting that level of risk. Morningstar actually have just published a paper on exactly this subject over the last couple of weeks, and their findings in the UK space were that the magic number is actually as low as 2.5%. It's as if you're selling units. Crazy, I know. That's based on 50% UK equities, 50% UK bonds. And crucially, they factored in an advisor fee. William Bengen didn't in fact factor in charges. So I think 2.5 could be a bit of a stretch unless you have an enormous pot. So is there a way of doing things differently? Generating income without having to rely on selling units? Yes, thank you. And listen, just to say, by the way, I've presented this a few times before, and it always worries me a little bit when I get to this, like the great reveal. This is very simple, but deliberately so, because this is the sort of thing that you could implement tomorrow. And I want to be talking to you about things which are practical, easy to implement, as opposed to just nodding heads, going, great, that's nice, and walking away. Crucially, it's distinct from a growth strategy. So if the FCA were ever to come knocking on your door and check your processes, tick. This would enable you to show you have a distinct process, growth versus retirement withdrawals. And from your bottom line, this affords you the chance to charge what you deem to be an appropriate fee. Some of the products out there are prohibitively expensive, really quite complex, and mean that you charging an appropriate fee could be challenged. Anyway, let's look at the table. We've split this thing into 3 columns: the need, the income source, and the rationale, or the reason for inclusion. We'll walk through these one at a time. But we've lumped them actually into eat and heat. That is covering your bare essentials, paying the bills, putting food on the plate. Over and above that, we've got the fun factor. I know, weird terminology, but there we go. That's your discretionary spend. That's everything thereafter. Let's start with the state pension. Single-tier state pension is £55.65 per week, which equates to £8,094 per annum. Not to be sniffed at, by the way, and probably most of us are guilty of doing exactly that. The reason I say that is if you think about the pot size needed to replicate that secure income stream from the state, then you would need a staggering £314,452. That's a gift from the state, thank you, or it's a return, whichever way you want to look at it. By the way, that's based on a 65-year-old male, single life, linked to RPI. £314,000, that's a stat for your clients, I think.
It used to be 66, if I may say so now.
66, there we go. Well, I'm sure it's not going to be enormously different, but fair point. So what would that money get you? It wouldn't get you one of those, not anywhere near here, to be fair. 1980? Well, yeah, quite possibly. Probably not in central London, mind you. I did have a look at Rightmove, just in the break to see what it would get around here. Quarter of a mile from here, nothing. Fair enough. Half a mile, nothing still. Jesus. 1 mile away from here in Borough, you can get a one-bed flat. It was actually quite a nice one-bed flat. But that's the state giving you a one-bed flat. Thank you. If you're a petrol head, then you can get a nice car. The point, actually, a quick sort of digression on this, you need to think about how sustainable this is. If the theme of this is sustainability, there's got to be a question mark on how much the state can afford this in years to come. That's a political argument. We'll sideline that for the minute. Sticking in the eat and heat bucket, annuities. We've already touched on them. You'll have your views. Some will be extreme views. I accept that. And the rates clearly have changed dramatically. Back in 1990, 100 grand would get you £15,640. My father was lucky enough to retire in 1996. He's got 11% annuity. Fantastic. Now you're doing well if you get £5,000 after 100. You start putting any bells and whistles in, you can get down as low as 2,757. That said, and this goes against, I think, what most of you are probably thinking, I suspect there's still a role for annuities with certain clients, the peace of mind, the certainty of income. And actually, the sales stats from Just Retirement would support exactly that. They've actually just seen an uplift in their quarterly sales. That's enough about annuities. Over and above that, I want to introduce you to bucket one, if you like, natural income bucket. I've just done RO8, by the way, to make sure I'm reasonably up to speed. 478 pages, 4 lines on natural income. Is it meaningless? I do not think so. Natural income could be incredibly valuable to pension planning. Whoops. So, natural income, what do we mean by natural income? As the name suggests, probably, this is drawing the income generated from the underlying investments. Now, in this construct, I'm talking about a global equity income fund. So you're just taking whatever dividends are being paid, taking those, and you're not reinvesting them. You could use a multi-asset income. It could be coupons. It could be dividends. It doesn't matter. This is a bucket of natural income producing stuff. You just leave the capital. The point on this is that you leave the capital to do what the capital does and rely on the natural income. What I am not talking about is employing some of these covered call strategies. And I can say that hopefully with some credibility, given that Insight actually offer one of the market-leading products in that space. Insight Equity Income Booster, a yield of over 8%, pays monthly, wonderful for out-and-out income, but there's a quid pro quo. If you're selling covered call options, you are potentially sacrificing some of the upside. And in this construct, your clients are more than likely to need both income and growth, which is why I'm not sure those types of products fit neatly into this construct. But there is a problem. Were I to stop there, and that's the end of this, then clearly there is a headache. The headache is that natural income is vastly depressed. Yields are at record lows. So to rely on the natural income, you would need an enormous pot of money. So what do? You sell units from something, but you don't want to be selling it from the very thing that's jumping around. You sell it from something that hopefully has a low volatility profile. To expand on that, I'm just going to walk through another illustration. Why low volatility is so important at retirement. So we've got 2 portfolios again. We've got the blue portfolio, which is the linear straight line, and we've got another portfolio that's jumping around. Now, both of them have a starting balance of £100,000. Both of them have an annual distribution of £5,000. There's your income. Both of them have an average investment return of 7%. And they're both going for 30 years. One has that linear return profile, that straight blue line, 7% year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, every year. Not going to happen. That's the illustration. Bear with me. The second one is jumping around. That's the volatile one, okay? Some good years, some bad. Now take a look. Focus your eyes on year 30 for both portfolios. £256,000, 205, for your linear rate of return, 0 for the one that's volatile. Probably truer to life, okay? And don't forget that a number of the cash flow modeling tools that are being employed in the industry assume exactly that linear rate of return. Do not factor in volatility. Absolutely have to consider it. So, the last sort of section of the presentation, I want to go through some working examples. Try and bring this table to life with some working examples. Now, what I was going to do, but partly I wasn't brave enough and partly I wasn't sure it worked too well, is go through this live with you and put some numbers into it. I have got a calculator which me and my colleague at work have built. It's on my laptop. I'd love to demo it after this session, maybe in the break, but where we can use a real life scenario, maybe a case you've got running now, what's the pot size, what the advisor charges, all this stuff I can build into it. But for the purpose of right here and now, we're going to have a Blue Peter moment. And here's one I prepared earlier, Mr. Conservative. So, in this scenario, we've got a client who has £300,000 starting capital, £20,000 income requirement, and they want to pass on some wealth to the next generation or generations plural. And for my natural income bucket, I have used the Newton Global Income Fund. I appreciate full well, this for you guys could be a suite of income producing funds. Get that. For my unit encashment bucket, I've used the Newton Real Return Funds. They're actually very credible strategies in their own right, otherwise I wouldn't put them in there. But I appreciate that you could have a suite of income stuff here and a suite of low vol stuff here. So, £300,000 starting capital. It's Mr. Conservative, so we put half the balance, bear with me, into an annuity, £150,000. Ow, I know. The balance, we are investing equally between our natural income bucket and our unit encashment bucket, £75,000 in each bucket. Our income target is £20,000. We're getting $8,094 from the state, don't forget it. We're getting a slightly depressing $6,984 from our annuity, but it's secure, sorting those bare essentials. The natural income earned from Newton Global Income, off a pot of $75,000, will get you $2,892. But we've got a shortfall. What do? We sell units, but we don't want to sell from a thing jumping around, of course. Leave Newton Global Income. We want to sell from the pot that is low vol. So Newton Real Return, we sell £2,030 worth of units per annum to get us to our target of £20,000. Tick. There's my income done. Thank you. Great, but what about my capital? What could my capital position be after 18 years? Why 18? That's the ONS life expectancy for average male age 65. Well, I was pretty impressed by, it was Anne Law, the lady from Pictet, saying life expectancy for a female age 40 was 97 or 100. Very good. Ooh. Anyway, that's the second time I've done that. Where was I? Right, so 18 years later, what's happened? My 75 grand in Newton Real Return, based on the historic average, bear with me, has grown to £206,017, and that is despite selling £2,030 worth of units every year. Newton Global Income has grown from 75 to 230,648 without reinvesting the income, without reinvesting it. We've spent years as an industry talking about the importance of the compounding effect. Ignore that for one moment, it's still very attractive growth without it. That's got us to 436,665. Wonderful. Despite having half the money allocated to annuity. The big problem with this, of course, and some of you might be sitting there slightly uncomfortably thinking, what is this guy on about? The next 18 years could be materially different from the recent past. Fully accept that, which is exactly why we've done a conservative outcome, if you like. And all we've done in the conservative column is tone down the potential growth rates by 50%. That's Mr. Conservative. What about someone else Mr. Legacy, who's more interested in passing on wealth to the next generation or the next generations, plural? And the same construct, but to keep things sort of short, I'm just going to point out the fact that we've allocated 0 to the annuity in this occasion. No allocation to the annuity. You're relying on the natural income and selling units. You're still hitting your income target, but look what's happened to the capital position. Now, that example employed a 50-50 mix of those two particular products. Natural income bucket, unit encashment bucket, 50-50. But it's not good enough to just show you that. What we wanted to think about, well, what is the optimum mix? What is the best mix of those two buckets to give you the best legacy? And of course, it's very much dependent on what products are within those buckets. But based on Newton Global Income and Newton Real Return, our findings, slightly crudely, admittedly, are that the higher the weighting to Newton Global Income, the better off you are. It was as simple as that, actually. But that's skewed because the capital growth of Newton Global Income, not the total return, the capital is really very impressive. Well, so is the total return for that matter. I've written down in the base here the sort of point that needs to be considered. And I'll read this out, actually, because otherwise I may get myself in a muddle. The adjusted growth rate of the unit encashment bucket, and what do I mean by adjusted growth rate? I'm talking about you have Fund X growing at whatever it is growing at. You're selling units from that proposition. That's reducing the growth rate, okay? You're sort of synthetically reducing it, if you like. Anyway, that adjusted growth rate of the unit encashment bucket should not fall below the capital growth rate of the natural income bucket. That's the sort of golden rule for optimum planning. Just to leave you with a bit more practical application of this stuff, we were starting to think about different risk profiles, how you could apply this for different risk profiles. And of course, it's a balancing act between income security and legacy. The higher the weighting to the annuity, the greater the income security, but the lower the legacy. This is common sense stuff. Why did I mention those two particular funds? Because they are incredibly impressive. I wouldn't be standing up here presenting them to you if they weren't. But please do have a look in your own time if you're not already using them. Unit encashment bucket, Newton Real Return. Importantly for the narrative of this construct, selling units from something which isn't jumping around horrifically. Remember, volatility, your enemy. That particular fund has half the volatility of global equities. It's had 11 out of 11 positive years, calendar years, and it's one of the few targeted absolute return funds to make a decent return or even a positive return in 2008. Finally, the natural income bucket, Newton Global Income Fund, first, number one in the sector, over 10 years for the income earned, for the income payments, and that's key for this construct. But arguably just as importantly, especially when it comes to suitability, is just how well it's done in a growth point of view. Number one fund over 1, 3, and 10 years in the whole sector. Two standout funds that I would urge you at least to consider. And just to wrap up, I suppose, I'm only too aware that you're living through this day in, day out. But it is a tremendous time of change for the pensions space. When it comes to accumulation, destination is key. That's your investment proposition. For decumulation or retirement withdrawals, the journey is key. And the construct that I've shared with you hopefully is sustainable both from your point of view as practitioners, coping with that level of demand in the future, but also hitting the needs of your clients. And how do you do it? Very simple. Income, natural income, giving you the income plus a bit of growth, hopefully. If that's not enough, you sell units from something not jumping around. And with that, I've got 56 seconds left and I'm done. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thanks, Dan. Anybody got a quick question for Dan in the 52 seconds remaining? Anyone? You're going to be around in the break, though, aren't you?
Yep, spot on.
If you want to grab Dan in the break and have a look at his computer, his calculator, please grab him. Thanks very much, Dan.
Cheers, Richard.
Right, we're going to move on to our second James Hay technical.